Today's topic is what happens karmically when a narcissist loses an empath. My name is Daniel Goleman, and today I want to share a deeper psychological and spiritual truth that most people overlook. On the surface, this may look like a normal breakup, just another relationship ending. But beneath behavior, beneath ego, beneath pride, there is an energetic exchange that many fail to understand. When someone loses an empath, they are not simply losing a partner. They are losing emotional regulation they depended on. They are losing someone who softened their impulses, absorbed their volatility, and reflected back a more stable version of themselves. In emotional intelligence terms, they are losing an external source of self-awareness. Let's break this into four powerful truths. First, the loss of borrowed light. Some individuals cultivate inner awareness. Others rely on external validation to feel significant. An empath often provides affirmation, patience, and understanding far beyond what is reciprocated. When that source disappears, the illusion of strength fades. Without someone buffering their insecurity, unresolved fragility becomes visible to others and to themselves. Second, the end of the grace period. Karma is not mystical revenge. It is psychological consequence. When an empath repeatedly forgives, they interrupt the feedback loop that would normally force growth. They absorb emotional cost. When they finally leave, consequences are no longer softened. Patterns that were once excused now create isolation, broken trust, and reputational damage. The delay ends. Reality begins. Third, the exposure of the shadow. While empathy is present, destructive traits are often managed indirectly. The empath mediates conflicts, repairs social fractures, and maintains emotional stability. Once gone, those compensating mechanisms vanish. Anger becomes more obvious. Manipulation becomes less effective. The persona becomes harder to sustain. Without reflection, self-deception intensifies or cracks. Fourth, the confrontation with truth. The most difficult moment is not abandonment, it is introspection. Without someone to blame, distract, or project onto, a person faces their own emotional limitations. Growth can happen here, but only if accountability replaces ego. And here is the deeper truth. When an empath walks away, it is rarely dramatic, it is decisive. It is the moment they choose self-respect over rescue. They are not trying to punish anyone. They are restoring balance within themselves. When emotional light withdraws, what remains is clarity. Not everyone recognizes value while they have it. But when someone who consistently offered compassion, patience, and depth chooses peace instead, the lesson is rarely temporary. My name is Daniel Goleman, and this is what happens karmically when a narcissist loses an empath. When a narcissist loses an empath, what collapses first is not the relationship, but the invisible structure that was holding their identity together. Empaths naturally provide emotional validation, reassurance, and patience, often far beyond what is reciprocated. They become a stabilizing force, absorbing tension, soothing insecurity, and reflecting back a version of the narcissist that appears confident and in control. But this confidence is frequently dependent on external affirmation rather than internal strength. When the empath walks away, that borrowed reinforcement disappears, and the carefully constructed persona begins to fracture. The narcissist may initially react with pride, denial, or indifference, convincing themselves that they are unaffected. Yet over time, the silence where admiration once lived becomes louder. Without someone consistently affirming their worth, unresolved insecurities surface. The absence of emotional buffering exposes fragile self-esteem that was previously hidden behind charm or dominance. This is where karmic consequence unfolds, not as mystical punishment, but as psychological exposure. The energy once directed outward through control or manipulation now has nowhere to go but inward. Self-doubt replaces superiority. Reflection replaces distraction. The loss forces a confrontation with the very emptiness that the empath once unknowingly shielded them from. And in that confrontation lies the true lesson. Strength that relies on another person's emotional labor is not strength at all. When the external source of validation vanishes, the individual must either build genuine self-awareness or remain trapped in cycles of projection and blame. The empath's departure becomes a mirror that cannot be avoided, revealing that identity built on borrowed light cannot survive once the light is gone. When an empath finally steps away, the emotional energy they once carried does not simply disappear. It returns to its original source. For a long time, the empath may have absorbed criticism, managed conflict, softened harsh behavior, and repeatedly forgiven actions that would have ended most relationships. In doing so, they unknowingly delayed consequences. They filtered emotional chaos and prevented it from fully landing where it belonged. But once they leave, that protective barrier dissolves. The narcissist is left alone with reactions they can no longer redirect or disguise. Conversations that once ended in reassurance now end in silence. Actions that once met patience now meet distance. What was projected outward begins to circle back inward. This is how psychological karma operates, not through revenge, but through the natural return of unresolved energy. Without someone to regulate their emotions or excuse their behavior, discomfort intensifies. The patterns that once felt powerful now feel isolating. The same strategies that once controlled situations begin to damage new connections. Over time, avoidance becomes harder to sustain. There is no empath to reinterpret events in their favor. No gentle voice reframing destructive behavior as misunderstood pain. What remains is the weight of unprocessed emotions and the growing awareness that consequences cannot be permanently postponed. In this space, one of two things happens. Either growth begins through accountability, or denial deepens into further dysfunction. The karmic lesson lies in that choice. When the emotional shield is removed, reality becomes clearer, and clarity demands responsibility. The empath's departure is not an act of punishment. It is the restoration of balance, allowing every action to meet its natural psychological result without interference. When an empath withdraws, the illusion that once protected the narcissist begins to unravel. Empaths often see potential beyond flaws, believing that beneath defensive behavior and ego-driven reactions there is a wounded core capable of change. Their belief acts like a spotlight, highlighting strengths while softening weaknesses. As long as that spotlight remains, destructive traits can stay partially hidden, even from the narcissists themselves. But once the empath steps away, that protective perception disappears. The admiration fades. The emotional cover is gone. Without someone interpreting their behavior in the most generous light, manipulation becomes obvious, inconsistency becomes visible, and charm loses its effect. The image that once felt convincing starts to crack under the weight of reality. Social masks are difficult to maintain when the one person who truly understood the inner workings is no longer present to validate them. This creates a silent exposure. The narcissist may attempt to replace the lost admiration quickly, seeking new attention or distraction. But something feels different. The depth is missing. The reflection is not the same. And in quieter moments, awareness begins to surface. They are confronted not by accusation, but by absence. The absence of belief. The absence of unconditional patience. The absence of someone willing to reinterpret their behavior as growth in progress. This is where the karmic lesson intensifies. Illusions can survive criticism, but they struggle to survive indifference. When the empath's light is no longer illuminating their potential, the shadow stands alone, unfiltered and undeniable. In that space, truth becomes unavoidable. Transformation becomes possible, but only if the individual chooses honesty over ego and accountability over blame. The most profound karmic shift occurs not in the moment of separation, but in the quiet aftermath when distraction fades and truth remains. When an empath wall caves away, they take with them emotional depth that cannot be easily replicated. They offered presence, attentive listening, intuitive understanding, and a rare ability to connect beyond surface-level interaction. At first, the narcissist may attempt to fill the void quickly, seeking new admiration, new attention, new validation. On the surface, it may appear that nothing has changed. But internally, something feels different. The replacements may provide excitement, but not grounding. They may offer attention, but not insight. Over time, the contrast becomes undeniable. The empath was not simply another source of supply. They were a stabilizing force, a mirror reflecting both strengths and weaknesses with sincerity. Without that mirror, self-confrontation becomes unavoidable. There is no longer someone absorbing emotional turbulence or reframing destructive patterns as temporary flaws. What remains is silence, and in that silence, awareness begins to grow. The realization slowly forms that something rare was lost, not because it was weak, but because it refused to tolerate imbalance. This recognition is the karmic lesson. It is the understanding that depth cannot be replaced with distraction, and authenticity cannot be substituted with performance. Whether that awareness leads to genuine growth depends entirely on the willingness to accept responsibility. But the void left behind serves as a permanent reminder that when someone who truly sees you chooses peace over chaos, it is not a loss of love, it is a loss of access to something profoundly rare.